Hello and welcome to ASM Connected, the podcast brought to you by ASM Technologies. In this episode, our account director Stephen Dale is back and he's speaking with Keith Christie-Smith, who is the country director for UK and Nordic Regions at OPSWAT. You'll love this conversation as it weaves its way through how OPSWAT have been dealing with some of the challenges faced by the coronavirus, how they're looking to engage with customers in the new normal, and some of the great products OPSWAT have on offer, with maybe a danger of a questionable rugby analogy.
Welcome, Keith. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Steve. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, OPSWAT operate in the cybersecurity sector, more specifically in the area of advanced threat protection. Their goal as a company is to eliminate malware and zero-day attacks. Further to that, they're interested in protecting critical infrastructure. Interesting fact, 98% of the nuclear power facilities in the USA are protected by their technology. Just dwelling on that fact there, 98%. It's an interesting number, but my burning question is, what happened to the other 2%, those mavericks? What are they doing?
The short answer probably is, Steve, that they just haven't heard of OPSWAT yet and would like to think that they potentially will be customers in the future. I mean, to be honest, the status is pretty phenomenal, really, when you think about it. It's one of the main draws for me joining the organization when I joined almost 3 years ago. To be honest, we've noticed a similar sort of trend across Europe. So myself and some of my colleagues in some of the other regions across Europe have seen the same uptake from within the nuclear and energy space and also the broader critical infrastructure space across Europe as well.
Yeah, so that's some of the business we've been involved with you as well, has been around that critical infrastructure, and it's good to see that success replicated in the different regions you work in. In fact, I've found that working with OPSWAT, you guys are really busy. I mean, just getting your time is difficult, and in our relationship as companies, it's really hit the ground running. You've delivered a lot of leads to us as the distributor and to our reseller and SI partners. So it's been really successful, and that story about critical infrastructure is really clear. So I'm going to work through a plan for our conversation that tries to get out of you some of that success and where that's coming from and what's behind it. To give a little agenda, so to speak, to try and keep us on track, I'm going to be asking you about sort of life at OPSWAT and what it's like working in the IT channel, but being in that sort of niche area. And then, interestingly, I want to discuss some predictions you made back in 2019. We've got the evidence. Let's see how that looks and see how well you did, not knowing, obviously, how things would change. Then I'm going to be looking to ask you about the effects of all these sort of changes. It's changing the industry. It's changing how we work. And I want to understand how you're continuing that success, but maybe in a slightly different way. Before we get into that, Keith, just some quick fire warm-up questions. It's my version of what I'd call a lockdown mindfulness survey. There's a little bit of a selfish reason why I want to know this, because I'm testing myself against everybody else. Have you been eating better or worse over this period?
I've been eating worse and probably more of it as well. Interestingly enough, I've definitely been exercising a lot more than I typically would because of my territory and what I cover and the portion of Europe that I cover. I travel a lot, so I travel probably every other week. That doesn't always lend itself to a healthy lifestyle. So being stuck at home, being able to get out on my road bike and do some miles again has been great. Whilst I've been eating more, and dare I say it's probably like everyone else in the UK, drinking a bit more than I probably should do as well, I have been actually exercising to try and balance it out. So as they say, healthy body, healthy mind and all that.
Calories in versus calories out. So you think you've got the balance right, do you?
I wouldn't say I've got it right, but it's a little bit better than it was before, mate.
Good. You mentioned drinking there, and I was going to ask about drinking, but I thought, let's not go down that route. I was basically going to say, I was going to ask you if you've been reading more or less.
No, I've been reading a lot more. Certainly in the last 3 months, from March, April, May, I went through 4 different books.
Yeah, it's good. It's good that you're using the time to do some good, but it's not such a bad thing that we can put the books down and head to the pub now for a change. On that overall feeling of how it's been over the last few months? Are you getting some benefit and enjoying what we might call the new normal, or are you one of these people that's going, come on, let's return to the old ways as quickly as possible, please?
I'm probably somewhere in the middle, Steve. I mean, I've certainly enjoyed spending more time at home. We've been pretty blessed with the weather since lockdown. It's been relatively good and nice and sunny and warm. So it's certainly not felt like a chore being at home at all. But I guess slightly conflicted by the fact that I'm in sales, and a vast majority of the leads, opportunities, and the business that we do is in relation to going out and meeting customers and taking customers from a point of them needing a solution all the way through to potentially procuring OPSWAT. So I guess I've missed that angle and that element of day-to-day life. But as you say, things are easing up now, and hopefully before the end of the year we'll start to get back in to see customers and face-to-face meetings, do some account management, and spend some time with some happy customers. Really.
Yeah, I think from that, I'm hearing that, it seems to be a little bit more manageable, and maybe you're even enjoying the time with the family in the way things have changed, but that work is maybe more affected by the change in routine. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to hear about that a little bit later, and how you're fitting in with those new ways of working. I think gyms are opening this weekend. I know squash, which is the game I play, that's starting again this weekend. I know rugby is the pretty much the closest contact of sport, so it's natural that that was going to come a little bit later. I was going to ask you, Keith, being from a US based company, do you get to talk rugby with any of your colleagues over there, or is it like a sport that's never discussed? I think they at one point it was a fast growing sport, and I think I've seen them in the sevens maybe. But do they follow rugby at all?
They do. Our director of business development, Tom Mullen, over in North America, and Tom's an avid rugby and proper football as well. He watches proper football, not American football fan. So there's always a bit of banter going back and forth on Slack from this side of the pond and with Tom.
So let's move on and get into the sort of crux of things around life at OPSWAT. I've mentioned you're a US based company. San Francisco is where the company's based from. You're not a startup. You've been going for 20 years, I see. We very much put you still in that innovator and disruptor space. Before I knew about OPSWAT, the area of malware wasn't particularly the most interesting area of the business for me until I heard about you guys and what you're doing in that space. It made it much more interesting for me. And I see that you've got quite a lot of patents that you've been getting over the last few years, which shows me you're a very intellectual property rich type of organization. So I wanted to ask you, how does it feel and what's the experience like working for a company that's got all this sort of intellectual property, these brilliant solutions, but in the IT channel, you're maybe not the first name on people's lips when they talk about malware. You're not the day-to-day solution in that space because of the specialist areas you work in. So, how do you balance the challenges with the benefits of your business?
Yeah, Steve, I mean, it's an interesting point that you raise. A lot of people that I speak to day haven't heard of OPSWAT, and that is changing. That is changing. I do get calls on a weekly basis now of people who have heard of us or have been recommended us by someone else in the industry. So that is changing slowly, and I guess that's why the organization brought on an EMEA sales VP and then the sales team across all the different regions is to really push forward the OPSWAT brand and the OPSWAT name. You touch on patents. We have a number of patents for various different technologies, and that's actually what we came to market with almost 20 years ago. Was some of those patented technologies. We have a product set called OESIS, OESIS, which a lot of organizations have not actually heard of or will be familiar with, but that's actually sold to pretty much all firewall and next-gen firewall vendors or VPN client vendors, and that performs a device compliance check. And we've now rolled that up into its own enterprise platform called Meta Access as well. And we're seeing a lot of traction with that technology, certainly since the beginning of lockdown with the whole work from home situation, because it allows organizations to utilize or to allow their users to utilize their own personal devices, but ensuring that they're up to a level of compliance before allowing them access into corporate resources. And we've actually been fortunate enough to win some pretty large, high-profile UK government business since lockdown off the back of that technology. But that's just one of a number of patents that we have. As you mentioned, we're very, very IP heavy. We've got a lot of our own technology, which is baked into loads of other different vendors, solutions, and technologies, which is why lots of customers don't know about us, but they may already be using some of our technology. And so it's always an interesting conversation with the customer where we walk them through that whole process and that scenario of where we've come from, ask them about some of the vendors that they're already engaged with and using and what functionality they're using. And nearly 9 to 10, it'll be that the customer's already using one of our technologies. They just don't know about it. I mean, the technology was certainly the number one reason why I joined OPSWAT. I can see the value in the technology, which means I can articulate that value out to our customers, and our customers will see value in the technology. And that, for me, as a frontline salesperson, is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, it's interesting about that angle you're explaining how the product is OEM'd into products that people are more familiar with. And I guess that's a really good way to push that brand recognition in the channel. And they might not have heard of you, but it doesn't mean it's this strange technology that sort of really weird and out there. People are already using it. So I think that's a good message that the channel would understand. We've worked with you across pretty much all of our customers. You know, some of the brands we work with are very focused on a particular type of customer, but I think we've got a really good coverage. So I'd agree that that name is becoming more known out there. Do you know when in that 20 years you did the company decide, look, let's stop being the guys that have our technology embedded in other people's solutions, but no one knows of us, and let's get our own name out there? Has that been a gradual shift, or is this a sort of recent change and method of going after your customers?
There was definitely a shift. It happened before I joined. Like I said, I've been in the business nearly 3 years now. So it's probably pushing on between 4 and 5 years ago that Benny, our CEO, really decided to make a big push from a sales perspective and market the technologies directly, rather than going purely via OEM relationships, which is still a very large part of the business. But yeah, as I said, that was about 4 to 5 years ago, where a full sales structure was brought into OPSWAT to really take our message out to markets. I mean, the technologies have, as you know, a phenomenal amount of value that they bring. A lot of customers that we speak to are still not familiar that there are even technologies such as ours in the market. And it's almost a bit of a utopian moment when you tell the customer what we do have to offer. It would be wrong for us not to take that message directly to market, and that's really why there was a big push to do so.
Definitely one for people to watch, and it ticks that whole box of that emerging sort of story. You know, the technology develops, but you're emerging and developing as a brand. So I think it's certainly one for people to listen out for, and they're going to be hearing a lot more from you over the coming years. Now that brings us nicely on to looking at the future and the predictions. So when we asked you last year, Keith, for your predictions for 2020, nobody knew what was going to happen. It seemed like a sort of normal thing to do, you know. You did put your answer in writing. We asked you on the 5th of November, and for accuracy here, I'm going to have to read it out. You said, in my view, I believe the big thing for 2020 in cybersecurity will be a focus on physical network segregation. This will be coupled with a drive to further adopt and deploy existing solutions purchased in customer networks. So we're over halfway through the year. It's gone weird, but are you sticking or twisting on those predictions?
Steve, you're putting me on the spot here. I'm going to be very careful about what I actually say to you in the future, Steve. I guess I would stick. I mean, I still, obviously, even with lockdown, I'm still speaking to customers on a day-to-day basis, you know, albeit over Teams and Zoom and the various other different platforms available. So I'm probably speaking to, in some cases, 3 or 4 clients a day or prospective clients a day. Network segregation is still very high on the agenda for the types of customers that we're speaking to. which are regulated industries, governments, finance, insurance, legal, etc. So for those customers, as well as we've got customers in retail and probably every other vertical out there, but network segregation is very much still on the agenda, maybe not as high up on the agenda as it certainly was in 2019. I would stick, but I'd probably like to add to that, which is obviously a move to work from home, and more specifically, the device compliance and device security and enforcing device compliance and device security. That's probably been, certainly has been the number one feature or product that customers have been coming to me for since the beginning of the year. And that's largely because customers are moving away from VPN and traditional ways of doing things. But yeah, I'd probably stick for the most part because I think the points are still relevant. Definitely work from home is one that I don't think anyone saw such a huge uptick on the agenda for 2020.
Obviously, security in general being a focus was, it was a great focus, wasn't it? It was a huge area of growth over the last few years. I think that's just gone even further. And I know a lot of the customers that I'm speaking to in the first half of this year, a lot of their budgets have moved across to security because they've quickly mobilized the workforce. They're using whatever technology that they've already got and extending that a bit like you predicted, people rolling out existing technology further. I think they've done that to the maximum on the networking side, but then they've got to make sure it's secure. So I think you were right to predict people focusing on security being important in a way, and that's certainly ran true. And what jumped out at me, Keith, is there's two words hidden in that message. It says physical segregation. Now, if only you knew your powers of prediction. To me, that's a bit like a Nostradamus type moment. The words are in there, and if we want to tweak history accordingly, then that was a cracking prediction. So yeah.
I think I think that will continue. Adoption of technologies is always an issue for all customers, especially the larger customers. Over the years we've seen C-level security leadership moving around a lot from customer to customer. I've known in some cases CISOs moving, in 5 years, sometimes 2 or 3 times across various different customers. What happens is technology gets acquired and it doesn't get deployed. So the further adoption of existing technologies is also going to be relevant, and that will always be relevant, I believe. I don't think in some cases cybersecurity programs never ever get to the end, especially things like privileged account management and DLP and some others.
It's definitely a moving target. Have you seen any customers that you've, say, deployed product with over the last 12, 18 months since COVID-19 kind of bring you back in to say, we've already got your technology, we're using it for this, but let's use it for something else and extend it out there into the rest of the network? Have you had any of those experiences recently?
Very much so. More so the first six months of this year than my previous 2.5 years within the business. Largely, I believe due to the fact that the attack surface for customers has grown exponentially. Right, traditionally, especially in some of our larger customers within banking, insurance, and finance, governments, secret services and defense forces across Europe. For a lot of those organizations, staff have to be in the office. Right, the work from home adoption is very, very low. So to change that from probably less than 10% to almost 100% working from home has meant that their attack surface completely changed, and it's grown exponentially. They're now leveraging a lot of platforms and services in the cloud that they wouldn't have adopted traditionally for compliance reasons and maybe security concerns, but have been forced into doing so. And they've needed technologies such as Meta Access product as well as our Meta Defender product line to actually go out and enforce security around access to those different platforms and services as well as the data itself. So it's device and data driven, because that device and data now doesn't reside within the office. It's in hundreds or thousands of different offices across people's houses all over the country and potentially all over the world. So I guess that's probably been the main driver for that. But yeah, certainly the first 6 months we've seen a lot of customers coming back and asking for additional products or even just additional licenses on what they've already procured from us.
Yeah, there's a lot to go at out there then, and I think you can't take security too seriously, really. As you say, the threats are coming from every angle. I see in the news just this week that other countries are trying to hack into systems to steal cures for the virus. This is high level stuff, and I think we need to leave no stone unturned in terms of security. So I think it's safe to say that you're going to be pretty busy for the rest of this year as well.
Yeah, and one major area we've seen, or growth area we've seen from a cybersecurity perspective, has been our email security component as well. We've got an email security solution that can scan with a number of different engines, up to 35 different engines. But more importantly, we have a feature function called content disarm and reconstruct, which allows us to remove active content from the email body as well as email attachments, which has become even more relevant since lockdown. I guess the first wave we saw was, people leveraging and get phishing campaigns out there, trying to sell miracle cures and all the rest via phishing campaigns. So our email security solution was quite heavily adopted as a result of that. But we just have to think back to a few days ago, what happened at Twitter. That was a compromised email. A user received the email, accessed the active content, it downloaded a payload and allowed access into the network, and all those high-profile Twitter accounts were hacked. It's very, very relevant, probably even more relevant than it was before, and that's just one of our components. So I guess putting those all together has meant that it's been a pretty busy time.
Yeah, I think it's good for us, for everybody else to know that we can rely on technology from the same people that are protecting critical infrastructure and roll that out across other businesses to give everyone that same level of security. So that's reassuring. So I want to move on to the next question, Keith. And you briefly mentioned the sort of C-suite moving around and obviously communicating those messages out there to different companies as you come across them. Now, I know your engagement with the customers can often be quite technical. Cybersecurity is a complicated technical space. But I think to have the success in the channel and to get your message across from everybody from that C-suite down to field sales reps, project managers, simple people like myself, I think it's great sometimes to simplify that message, whether it's through stories or just be able to explain it in terms that people can understand. So I wanted to ask you and focus on the Meta Defender kiosk, which is a product that I know we've had joint success with between our businesses. A lot of our customers have deployed that technology. And it'd be good if you could explain to us what the Meta Defender kiosk does, but just to make it a little bit more interesting, maybe you could explain it using some rugby analogies.
Gosh, Steve, you don't like to put me on the spot.
That's
do
tricky.
You?
It's tricky, that, isn't it? I'm sorry, Keith. Sorry. I said I'd get you back one day. Do you remember that night?
I think you say that to me every time I see you, mate. Sure. So Meta Defender Kiosk is a solution that we've brought to market specifically to address the risk associated to removable media and bringing files and data via removable media. User has the ability to engage a USB or removable media device into the kiosk. We then have the ability to, kick that data into touch and into the secure network behind the opposition. That then gives the said person that's bought the media or the data on site the ability to then go into the opponent's 22 and collect the data before going and score a try.
I like it, Keith. You've done well there. Do you know what you've done? You've turned defense into attack there.
That's the best form of security, right?
Exactly. I like it. I wasn't expecting that. Okay. So when I asked you the question, I knew I was putting you on the spot. And from what I know about the technology and how you use sort of every different malware platform and bring them all together, I was imagining something like sort of, instead of just having those 8 guys in the English scrum in front of you, but you also had the kind of the Argentinians and then the South Africans and then the Kiwis pushing in behind. So we've got like a 30-man scrum there just to just to help us win the ball. Would that work as well?
It does indeed, mate. It very much does. We've actually just signed up WebRoot as another anti-malware engine within the last week.
So that's like bringing in the Romanian pack.
we now have 36 engines available on our Defender multi-scanning platform, so we could scan with over 2 rugby teams worth of individuals.
I think that's a brilliant way of explaining the products, so thanks for that. Just moving along to the last main question, really. We've talked about how working patterns have changed. You've already touched on how you're communicating with people. The conversations have changed slightly, and everybody's talking about digital acceleration and transformation, innovation. I don't think I've heard anything recently or read anything about our industry that doesn't involve that terminology. So how are you adapting and bringing the new communication into your conversations with the customer? Because it's not just going to be a one-off, is it? I think you're going to be getting used to this new way of communicating with customers for the near future. So how are you handling that change?
We've always been relatively remote as an organization. Well, certainly the sales team across Europe, because we are pretty disparate. So I do a lot of video calls, Zoom calls, Teams calls and the likes, traditionally day to day. I guess the big change has just been that that's all that I'm doing. So pretty similar, I guess, to how we've been doing it before. I firmly believe we'll get back to, I guess, our old normal as opposed to the new normal we're in today.
But you're keeping busy. So you're using that time. How are you using that time that you would normally be traveling? How are you using that instead? Is it more conversations or more time to spend on sort of strategy?
You know, I was chatting to some of the guys internally the other day, just to say, you know, in my view, I think it's probably the busiest we've ever been. It's, I guess, been a bonus not having any other distractions, because we've just all been sat at home in my office, and has given me just the ability to focus solely on customers and customer engagement, and that in itself has then made it a lot busier. So it has been a benefit not having to travel as much, but no, certainly trying to make the most of the situation.
It's good that you're keeping as busy as you always were before. In summary, for me, I think it's really interesting that you're this rich sort of IP company that has been OEMing your products into other products for a long time, and that you're sort of starting to come out from that over the last number of years, and really getting a name for yourselves out there in the industry. And I think for people out in the channel that may not already be having conversations with you, knowing that your product is not new, but it is very innovative and very relevant in what's going on out there today, then I think, yeah, it's a good reason for people to be having a conversation with you. Really appreciate your time, Keith. What's your summary? How do you what would you like to get across?
Thanks, Steve. I hadn't really thought of too much of a summary until you mentioned. For us, I guess it's just we're always looking to meet more channel partners, more channel organizations. You know, we're engaged with over 100 enterprise customers just in the UK alone, and those customers will already be engaged with, I guess, a lot of the resellers out there that you're already engaged with, and they may not know it, or probably don't even know about it, or know about OPSWAT. So we're always looking to engage with more resellers who have existing relationships with existing customers, as well as net new prospects as well, that we can go and target together, and obviously prove the value of the OPSWAT solution.
Look, it's been great. I've had a lot of fun. Sorry I put you on the spot, but I think yeah,
you're good, mate.
You did well. You did really well. I think, yeah, turning that defense into attack, absolutely. So just to finish off, I'll give you one last chance. Would you still like to change those predictions, or are you sticking with it?
I think I'll stick, mate. I will stick.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Keith.
No problem.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers, you too. Cheers, mate.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of ASM Connected. Some really great insights in there from both Keith and Stephen. Over the next few weeks, we've got some more great guests coming up on our podcast, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. If you'd enjoyed this episode, then we'd really appreciate if you could leave a review on your podcast app of choice. Finally, if you'd like to find out more about what we do here at ASM, head over to our website at asmtech.com.